What's going on, guys? So hope everyone's having a beautiful day. Today is Friday, as we say in Hawaii, happy Aloha Friday. Behind me we have a little structure with a pretty big gap. I wouldn't say a gap, it's an opening, but at the same time this is for flying your drone through any kind of smaller space or smaller gap. All the principles that I'm going to talk about today with this opening are going to apply to a smaller space, like in tree branches or any kind of little gap, even with flying through your car window, for example. Something more technical. Things that I'm going to talk about will actually touch on everything that you need to know and need to do in order to fly safely through a space, ideally something smaller like a gap. So our weapon of choice drone-wise today is going to be the Mini 3 Pro. Any smaller drone is going to be a great drone to start out with, flying smaller little openings and gaps, of course. Because of its profile, it's going to be smaller, just a little less expensive too, most likely, so not a big deal if something does happen. They're a little bit more forgiving if you do clip something, but at the same time, everything I'm going to talk about and touch on today will apply to really any drone, even an Inspire 2, for example, or Inspire 3. I wish I had one, but without further ado, let's fly this guy and get it kind of going. So we'll get this up and running. I got my little controller right here, the RCN1. I got a little flight path bag with the Mini 3 Pro in here. Gonna get this guy out, power on the remote. I'm using my iPhone 13 Pro Max. We got the drone. This is the park district I actually work at part-time, so should be pretty good. No real issue, not crowded. So that's another thing when you're flying little places like this. You want to make sure you're not buzzing over people, because that's no-no, even with a small little 249-gram drone. But we got a full battery. We're going to power it on. And again, all of these little tips and tricks on flying through a little gap or a little space. Again, I know the space we're flying behind me is not super small, but it's forgiving, and I don't want to be flying through super tight little spaces while I'm recording the video because it gets distracting and I just don't want to have an incident. I'd rather just show you, and then you can apply it with smaller spaces and go from there. So we got kids screaming. Power on this guy, set it down. We'll do a screen recording, of course, as well. Put this guy in. Now the sun is coming out full on, which is never really fun with the iPhones because they like to force dim on you. So we're gonna go ahead and I'll get into the Fly app. I'm gonna make sure all my apps are force quit down so we have nothing open other than the Fly app, the app that we're using. So I'm gonna go ahead and record my screen starting right now. We're gonna hit Go Fly. We're gonna go in the auto. And this is one of the things too, when you're flying through a space, a lot of times when you're going through the space, it's gonna change exposures because it's gonna be darker once you're updated. Oh, there's that new voice, which is annoying. We're gonna lower that. But when you go through a space, it may have an exposure change, so you don't want to have it set to auto because it just does not look professional. So set it to Pro and adjust your exposure manually and try to find a nice balance. Right now we got a beautiful blue sky with some really nice clouds, so that's going to be my focus and the hero part of the shot essentially. So anyway, just keep that in mind. Tip number one, do not have it set to auto exposure. So we're going to get this guy up in the air. It's saying screen recording failed because I'm getting a call. I'm going to put it in the airplane mode. And I'm going to start the screen recording one more time. And now what I'm going to do too, just so you guys are aware, I'm going to face the different position, and I'm going to move so I can actually physically get line of sight on the drone going through the space. So that's tip number 2, I guess. So right now I'm going to yaw the drone, and I can physically see the drone, right? So that's tip number 1, or tip number 2, visual line of sight. Tip number 1 was a little advanced, meaning a little premature for where we're at, but we want to keep it on manual exposure. Tip number 3 is going to be enable all your grid lines. So if you go into settings in the top upper right hand corner, we're going to go into camera and we're going to enable all the grid lines. Most importantly, this one right here, that little center point. But we want them all enabled just to kind of have that done. And this is going to essentially be a little target. That crosshair in the middle is going to be where we're aiming the drone to go through. So that's going to be our bullseye as far as where we're going to want to go and fly through. Another thing, so tip number, what is that, 4? We're going to want to make sure we have obstacle avoidance turned off. So we don't want this on because we don't want to have any hiccups. We're in control. We're manually flying the drone. We're manually exposing the drone, and we're going to fly it through a space that probably doesn't want us to fly through, but we know our abilities, or we should know our abilities, and we're going to go ahead and rock it. So let's go ahead and cruise to the space to kind of look at what we're going to do. So another tip is to physically walk to the space and inspect it just without even flying the drone if you want to, just so you can see the space, you can see if there's any power lines, any weird little cables, anything that you need to be concerned about, a little tree branch that you may not see like right now on the monitor. So I've done that because I know this area, but I'm going to go through and we're going to fly again to this little opening. And see how beautiful the sky is? But right now what I'm doing is I'm physically looking at the drone so I can see the drone, and I'm also keeping my eye on the crosshair. So these crosshairs in the middle are basically going to take me right through. Even if I don't see my drone right now, I know if those crosshairs are in the middle of that, I'm basically safe, because that's going to point the drone in the exact direction of where we want to go. So boom, and then maybe we cruise out like that, and it kind of reveals the landscape and the sky. But I'm going to come back down, and I can see the drone physically, and we're going to cruise backwards. And a lot of times you can get the same shot by doing it in reverse, and we're going to cruise through. Where am I? Oh, now I'm losing sight of the drone. There we are. Okay, cruise backwards. Point it in the right direction. And say we want to go up a little bit. And that can be a really nice shot as well. So we don't have to even go cruising through forward. We can just kind of cruise through reverse and get a shot like that. Let's go ahead and get a shot with the sky. And one other tip is going to be throw it into cine mode. So we're going to have the most control, well, not the most, but we're going to have the easiest time to fly through the space when we don't have to go really fast. So I'm shooting at 4K, 24 frames a second. Right now I'm in auto. I'm going to switch out of auto, as I said, and we're going to go ahead and expose it accordingly for, which I should have an ND filter. I don't even have them for the Mini 3 yet. And we'll probably expose, yeah, the sun kind of keeps on going in and out. Maybe I'll go 1/3200th of a second, which is super fast. But what I'm watching now as I fly to this, I'm mainly looking at that crosshair to be in the right position. So I can look at the drone and I'm seeing the drone fly, but what I'm mostly concerned with is that those crosshairs are pointed directly in the center of that opening. So right now they're pretty much in the center. I can maybe fly a little bit to the right. I'm still going forward. And you see the crosshairs are going to tell me exactly where I need to be. And then I'm going to kind of cruise up in altitude. and we can get a shot like that, which is kind of cool. Nothing epic, but nice enough that you're getting a cool little shot, you're flying a little technically, and life is good. Now let's go ahead and cruise up. We're gonna go ahead and do this properly, put in the professional mode. Really properly would be having ND filters and having our shutter speed a lot lower than 3200 of a second. That's pretty obnoxious. I get it, so you don't have to yell at me in the comments below. And we're gonna go ahead and hit record. And now as I'm flying in, my key thing is not necessarily physically looking at the drone, it's physically looking at that crosshair on my display and pointing it in the center of that opening, and that's what I'm watching. I'm not even looking at my drone right now. There we go. And now we're gonna go ahead and cruise to the right and go up a little. That wasn't really smooth, but regardless, you could kind of see what is involved when you're actually flying something like this. So you can try one more time. But those are some of the key things, because people don't really understand. Utilizing that grid line is basically pointing your drone in the exact precise position and direction that you want to be when you're flying. So I can see the drone right now, for example, it's right in front of me. But if I go ahead and cruise all the way to that little gazebo, whatever it's called, the little stage, guess what? I can't really see the Mini 3 because it's such a small little gray drone and it just kind of blends in, but I can see these crosshairs and where they need to be. So let's go ahead and go up again. We'll try one more time. But I'm hoping this helps a little bit and sheds some light on how to go ahead and start flying through gaps. So you can see right now I'm pointing those crosshairs down in the center, don't necessarily need to, but we have it on auto exposure. We have it in professional manual exposure. We have it in cine mode. We have our obstacle avoidance turned off, and we have all of those crosshairs enabled, which means we're good to go. We're gonna physically fly our drone and kind of cruise down a little bit. Maybe I can rotate the gimbal up a little. But again, I'm looking at the crosshairs and where they need to be. Right now, I still need to go lower. It's getting hard to see my display because the stupid iPhone force dimmed on me. But I can still tell, even though I'm kind of high, that was bad, that I'm safe because those crosshairs were giving me enough clearance and guidance visually to know that I wasn't going to crash the drone. So I don't want to go too crazy on this. Let me see. Where are you, drone? See, I can't even, oh, now I can see it again. So in theory, I could fly through my car windows. That's a little riskier. I don't know if I want to do that, but we can fly through. Let's see. So I don't think I'm going to do this because my display force dimmed on me. And I just can't visually see really clearly right now what's going on, and my display brightness is all the way up. But I would be doing the same thing. I would be going in. Let me see, hold on a second. So I'm gonna fly with the drone and see if this thing looks any better from the other side. But just to show you what would happen if I wanted to fly through this space would be to put the crosshair right in the center, and with something like this, I would physically want to be watching the drone too. And it's kind of windy, and I'm kind of not necessarily feeling it. So we're gonna stop about right there because it's not worth crashing this drone for a shot that I know I could get and I would not really necessarily even want right now. But the wind is kind of gusty, and it's not worth it for me for this video. So to go over everything, throw it into cine mode, make sure you're not in auto, you're in manual mode. Make sure you have all the grid lines enabled, which is down here under camera settings. Essentially the crosshair is key, because if we don't have that crosshair enabled, I mean, you have the little cross in the center, but that really does help out with giving you a little target on where you need to be. And then of course, we're gonna also have our obstacle avoidance turned off, because if we have it on, let's see what will happen. We'll kind of cruise. Let me make sure everything's on. Let's see if it's gonna stop us. Yeah, it's not getting in the way right now. But it could if it was a smaller opening, for sure. So just for kicks, I'd probably keep this off so you don't have anything kind of causing you to go in a direction you don't want to go. So I'm hoping that helps and it gives you guys some clarification and clarity on what you need to do to fly through a smaller space a little bit more carefully and precisely, mainly looking at those grid lines more so than physically looking at your drone will keep you where you want to be. And if it's a really tight space, use both of them equally. Watch it physically, but at the same time, really pay attention to those grid lines on your display, because that's going to give you exact precision on where you need to be. It's kind of like looking at your exposure on your camera and looking at your histogram. The histogram is going to be always the most accurate, as opposed to a display that may be too bright or off a little bit. So anyway, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and aloha guys, have a beautiful and safe weekend, and that's it, bye.